What if I told you the Erdtree is a mere illusion? That grand golden tree, radiant with shining rays, dominant and symbolic, the representation of everything the Golden Order holds dear. Towering over the horizon, gold and almost see-through, the tree dominates everything. It is the axis around which the entire world of the lands between turns. Every faction bows to it or rebels against it. Every character is defined by their relationship to it. The Golden Order draws its authority from it. Warriors die protecting it. The faithful pray toward it. Even the tarnished, exiled and graced, find themselves drawn back to it. It is omnipresent. It is inescapable. To everyone standing under those branches, it feels like the most solid truth in existence. But stare closely at the Erdtree. Take a moment to examine the glow. The light fills the sky, completely overwhelming anyone who looks up. Still, the trunk lacks solid mass. You get the distinct feeling that your eyes pass directly through the Erdtree and into the empty air behind it. Nobody can actually touch the bark. The closest any person will ever get is the heavy door blocking the entrance. The Erdtree stands as the absolute peak of holy power across the lands between. Whole kingdoms built their cities around these roots. Rulers wearing gold crowns and peasants wearing muddy rags all place their complete trust in the Erdtree. What if I told you all this glory is just an illusion? Of course, this is no small claim to make. The tree is the foundation upon which life is ordered and unto which it is returned. To call it an illusion feels almost absurd. Yet, the truth often hides in the most obvious places. Walk the ruined roads of the lands between, and you will find scattered clues. They are incredibly easy to ignore, but if you gather them together, these small fragments suggest this theory about the Erdtree might actually have some standing, even a little bit. Before we examine the tree itself, consider grace. Those golden wisps that drift and guide the tarnished across the lands between. Small lights that seem to know where they are going, even when we do not. Not everyone can see them. The common folk of this land, the merchants haggling over spices, the soldiers standing their watch, the faithful kneeling in churches with their hands pressed together, none of them follow grace. They cannot. It is not given to them, and no amount of wanting will change that. Grace is visible only to those it chooses, and to everyone else, it simply is not there, as absent as a colour they have never learned to see. And the world knows this. Almost every character who speaks of grace asks you first, do you see it? As if they already expect the answer might be no, as if the possibility of not seeing it is entirely normal, an unremarkable fact of how things are. Nobody is shocked by blindness to grace. It is expected. It is the default. Sight is the exception, and the ones who have it are marked by that fact, whether they want to be or not. This is a world, then, where reality is not equal, where something can be entirely present for one person and entirely absent for another, standing in the same room, looking at the same patch of ground, where belief and blessing and sight determine what is real and what is not, rather than the other way around. Truth here does not wait to be discovered, it waits to be granted. And so if not everyone can see grace, why would the Erdtree be any different? The Erdtree, after all, is the source of grace, and its destination both, the route and the return. If the light it sends out is selective, unequal, granted rather than given freely, why should the tree that sends it be exempt from the same rule? Why should the Erdtree alone of everything in this world be the one true thing that everyone is allowed to see the same way. This becomes even more puzzling when we consider the minor Erdtrees. They are sacred trees in their own right, scattered across the lands between as smaller reflections of the one true tree, and yet their trunks are made of actual wood and bark, solid, physical, something you could press your palm against and feel the roughness of. So why is the great tree, the one that towers above all of them, made of nothing but shining gold light and nothing else? The first thing you notice when you enter Leyndell, the capital city of the lands between, is that it is breathtaking. The architecture is unlike anything else in the known world. Grand arches stretching overhead, golden spires catching what light manages to reach them, streets wide enough for giants to walk two abreast. It is a city worthy of its reputation, worthy of the tree that looms above it, and for a moment you simply stand there, taking it in, letting the scale of it wash over you. But as the awe settles, something else begins to creep in. The streets are empty. Soldiers sit in resignation at their posts, long since given up on whatever they were meant to guard. And everywhere, coating every surface, piling against every archway and doorway, is ash. The ash is impossible to ignore. It is not the residue of a recent fire, something that could be swept away and forgotten by morning. It has settled, accumulated, become part of the city itself, layered into the stone the way dust settles into an old house left too long without visitors. The citizens knew this, and they sealed their doors and windows against it in a desperate attempt to keep it out of their homes. But the ash was not going anywhere, and neither, it seems, were they. This ash had to come from somewhere, and we know exactly where. The tree was burnt before. But here a question arises. If the Erdtree is an illusion, what does Melina actually set ablaze? You cannot burn light. You cannot burn faith. So look again, look closer, at the base of the tree. There, almost easy to miss beneath all that overwhelming gold, is a section of real, physical, tangible wood and bark. It is the only part of the tree that is not light, the only part that is not illusion, and perhaps the only part that ever could catch fire in the first place. The Blessed Dew Talisman tells us that the sap of the Erdtree was once thought to drip from its boughs forever, an endless, uninterrupted gift. But that age of plenty swiftly came to a close, and with time, the Erdtree became less a living thing and more an object of faith. Not a gradual fading, the kind that creeps in over centuries unnoticed, but a swift end, sudden enough that people still remembered what came before it. Something happened to the physical tree, something that ended it as a living thing, and what remained in its place was faith given form, filling the space where the real tree used to stand. So if anything was to burn, it had to be that small remaining piece of wood at the base, the last physical fragment of what the Erdtree once was. For what else was there left to burn? Old stories claim that finding the truth requires digging down to the roots. The Erdtree definitely possesses a massive root system. You simply have to travel deep beneath Leyndell to find it. Leave the bright city streets and walk down into the dark underground caverns. Far away from the shining roofs, The hidden base of the Erdtree waits in silence. Thick wooden limbs snake through the dirt. They feel completely solid. You can touch the damp bark with your bare hands. This makes the base entirely different from the phantom light filling the sky above. You will find 0 gold in this deep place. Instead, you face ancient wood suffering from heavy disease. The structure twists awkwardly through the rock. It looks like it started dying ages ago. You cannot ignore the meaning here. Look up at the surface and you see a glowing pillar. Everyone in the lands between builds their life around that beacon. Then look down into the dirt. The buried roots sit in total ruin. They suffer from deep decay, yet they remain completely physical. This brings up a clear possibility. The glowing Erdtree acts as a simple mask. The Golden Order uses this sheet of light to project endless power. The display helps them look holy and untouched by time. It perfectly hides the crumbling wood buried below the earth. The Golden Order refuses to show weakness. They would rather project a massive lie across the sky than confess their perfect era has already failed. But perhaps we are being too harsh. Perhaps the Golden Erdtree is not a lie, so much as a remnant. A soul that outlasted its body and kept standing long after the body itself gave out. After all, we have seen this before in the lands between. Rani shed her body and persisted as a soul alone, and yet no one would dare call her unreal for it. No one would say she stopped mattering the moment her flesh fell away. Maybe the Erdtree did the same, in its own way, on a scale too vast to fully grasp. Maybe what shines above us is not a deception dressed up to fool the faithful, but a ghost that refused to leave, a presence that lingered because the alternative, true absence, true silence, where the axis of the world used to be, was simply unthinkable. Whatever the tree may be, illusion or solid gold, physical or spectral, it hardly matters once you consider its influence. Armies waged wars in its name. Figures of immense power were welcomed into its grace, or cast out from its light, and that distinction alone was enough to define the entire course of a life, to make or unmake someone before they had any say in it. A regular object cannot command that level of devotion. A basic myth cannot force kings to draw their swords. The results on the ground are undeniably real, regardless of what actually hangs in the sky. So let us set this heresy aside for a moment. We have entertained it enough. Instead, let us talk about time. Farum Azula, a city frozen in the sky and a city frozen in time. Forget about walking up a path to reach those gates. A boat cannot sail through the sky to drop you off either. Reaching this place requires a sudden rip in reality. A harsh force grabs you and throws you straight into this flying graveyard. The world itself breaks wide apart to let you step foot on these stones. Once your boots hit the ground, the reason for this rough journey makes sense. Heavy bridges break apart, yet the falling stones refuse to drop. Tall towers lean over the edge without ever crashing down. Huge sections of the city hang completely still in the empty air. The collapse paused right in the middle of happening. A harsh storm constantly tears through the ruins. The winds never die down. This endless weather replaced the natural sky long ago. Dragons glide through the rain exactly as they did in the ancient past. These beasts ruled this territory long before anyone spoke the name of the Golden Order. Everything in Farum Azula remains unfinished. A dropping rock never hits the dirt. A dying creature never takes a final breath. The city lives in a permanent pause. It stays trapped exactly halfway between living and breaking apart. We need to pause and ask a basic question before we try to figure out the deeper purpose of Farum Azula. We must identify what this place actually represents. The answer gets quite strange the deeper you look. Long before you ever travel to the flying city, you interact with its remains. You trip over the evidence right after walking out into Limgrave. Heavy blocks of carved stone sit deep in the dirt. These massive structures decorate the green fields and shallow lakes. If you examine the masonry, you will notice a distinct pattern of curves. Whoever shaped these pillars lived long before our current era began. The builders belong to a totally forgotten chapter of history. You can easily pick up small pieces of this rubble from the ground. Look at a ruin fragment. The text clearly describes a floating temple in the sky. Pay attention to where these rocks landed. You will only find this specific rubble across the western map. Large piles blanket Limgrave and Liurnia. The impact zones tell a clear story. A massive structure broke apart high above the clouds and dropped its bones straight down into the western continent. The ruins smashed into the grass and stayed there. Now travel to the eastern side of the map. The environment changes completely. You will spot buildings that perfectly match the old Farum Azula design. The Bestial Sanctum shares the exact same masonry. You can walk across giant bridges featuring those same ancient curves. However, these eastern landmarks did not fall from the clouds. Builders stacked those stones, starting from the ground up. You will find 0 crash sites or smashed rubble in this region. The geography paints a clear picture of a divided civilization. Total collapse ruined the western half. A deliberate migration shaped the eastern half. A specific group of survivors abandoned their crumbling home in the clouds. They traveled east and started building fresh temples in the dirt. Meanwhile, their original home shattered into pieces. A few managed to walk away. Everyone else fell with the rocks. You can easily make a solid argument that Farum Azula never truly belonged to the lands between. Its heavy stones likely never rested in local dirt. The fortress could have started its existence completely off our map, originating within the distant home of the ancient dragons. Unknown forces dragged the massive city through the air to bring it here. These powers ruled long before the Golden Order ever formed or claimed authority. Human builders always stack their stones up from the ground. Farum Azula ignored this basic rule entirely. The floating capital arrived by dropping straight down out of the clouds. Let us move underground and inspect the stone catacombs. You can explore these resting places from the southern shores all the way to the snowy peaks. If you look closely at how they treat the dead, a clear pattern emerges. Every single tomb across the lands between follows the exact same burial traditions created in Farum Azula. You might casually run past these graves while hunting for supplies. It takes only a second to ignore the architecture. But stop walking and really think about the timeline here. Long before the Erdtree grew, the flying city shaped how people handled their dead. This tradition started before Marika placed her hands on the Elden Ring. It happened long before the Golden Order formed their rules. The customs of Farum Azula took root deeply in every single region. Their culture mapped out the afterlife long before that giant pillar of light ever appeared in the sky. This naturally leads to asking exactly who constructed this floating city. The builders were the Beastmen. You can read the text attached to Bestial Vitality to learn their history. The description states a higher power reached down and gifted these creatures with human thought. They took that spark of intelligence and raised a massive society from the dirt. You can easily find the remains of their lives scattered across Farum Azula. The collapsing halls hold solid proof of their culture. Walk through the stone corridors and you will see countless skeletons turning into fossils. These old bones rest permanently fused inside the walls. The Beastmen carved out specific chambers just to honor their fallen friends. Pay attention to how they dressed these bodies. Nearly every single skeleton wears thick gold. You will spot gold bracelets wrapping around dry arm bones. Heavy gold necklaces hang from their necks. Their families deliberately left precious metal trinkets beside them for the journey ahead. However, this metal looks completely different from the materials used by the Golden Order. This material stays completely raw. It remains totally unmixed with cheaper ores. The smooth polish of the current era never touched these ancient rings. You are looking at the oldest gold in existence. The Beastmen understood the heavy power of this yellow metal ages ago. They claimed it and wore it long before anyone else in the lands between even thought to dig it out of the ground. And in this world, gold means one thing above all else: the influence of the greater will. Because there was an Elden Ring in Farum Azula, there was an Elden Lord, the Dragon Lord Placidusax, whose remembrance tells us he was Elden Lord in the age before the Erdtree, and that once his god fled, he remained behind, waiting for a return that never came. The greater will had already been here, long before Leyndell or the Golden Tree, already chosen a lord, already worked its will through gold and dragons and beastmen, shaping a whole civilization in its image, the same way it would shape another one later. And then it was destroyed. A meteorite struck the city, shattering it, sending it into the perpetual, slow collapse we find it in today. A fall that started in an instant and has somehow never finished. The Beastmen, once granted intelligence by that same golden influence, began to revert the moment it was gone. They lost the blessing, lost the civilization, lost even the memory of what they had built with their own hands. Now they roam the ruins of their own great city, hunched and feral, cannibalizing their own history without ever knowing it was theirs to begin with, ignorant of the fact that it was they who raised these stones in the first place. And yet the city did not fall. Not all the way. Not ever. It crumbles, yes. It has been crumbling for longer than the Golden Order has existed as an idea. But it has never finished crumbling. The stones hang in the air where they were caught mid-collapse. The storm rages on without exhausting itself. The Crucible Knights, guardians of an era that predates the tree itself, remain at their posts still, fighting and loyal to a purpose the rest of the world buried and forgot generations ago. Even look at the trees in Farum Azula. They are the same trees found everywhere else across the lands between, and yet they are wrong somehow. Drained of color, burnished like old bronze, as if something slowly bled the life out of them over a span of time too long for anything living to survive. And in that sense, Farum Azula is the purest image of time refusing to move in the entire lands between. A civilization at the peak of its power, struck down in an instant, preserved forever at that exact instant, still falling and storming, and still waiting for a god that fled and never returned. And then there is the isolated divine tower. To reach it, you cross a bridge that feels like it leads nowhere. No city on the other side, no settlement, no sign that anyone ever lived here. Just the bridge stretching out over empty air, and then the tower standing alone at the edge of the world. Every other divine tower has a purpose, a connection to make, a great rune waiting to be restored. This one is no different in that sense, and yet it feels abandoned even by its own function, a structure that has outlasted whatever world it was originally built to serve. At the top, the two fingers rest, and with them the means to restore the power of Melania's great rune. Melania, the most fearsome demigod in the lands between, her power sealed away here, in the most isolated, forgotten corner of the map, as if whatever placed it here wanted it as far from everything else as it could manage. But look out from the top of that tower, scan the horizon, past the clouds and the distance, and there it is, barely visible, hanging in the sky. Farum Azula. This is the only place in the entire lands between where you can see it. Two isolated things acknowledging each other across the void, with no road between them, no grace connecting them, no golden order binding them together. Just a line of sight and nothing else, as if the only things left that can still recognize each other are the things time itself forgot to finish with. And perhaps that is the point. The isolated divine tower does not just stand apart in space, it stands apart in time. A place that stopped the way Farum Azula stopped, the way Leyndell almost stopped, the way everything in the lands between edges towards stopping eventually, given enough time. And yet, even within the frozen ruins of Farum Azula, something still remains standing. The Crucible Knights. You will encounter them in Farum Azula, two of them, one standing over the corpse of a slain dragon, another locked in battle with the beastmen that roam the crumbling streets, among creatures that have been fighting since before the current age began. And the moment you face one, you understand that whatever they are, they belong to something that came long before the world you have been navigating. But Farum Azula is only the beginning, because the Crucible Knights are everywhere. They are in Stormvale Castle, in the depths of Nokron, in Leyndell, in the Altus Plateau, in Volcano Manor, in the Catacombs, scattered across the entire lands between without apparent pattern or allegiance. Warriors of immense power, bearing no single banner, serving no single lord, turning up in the strangest corners of the world, as if each one simply chose a place and decided to remain there until the end of time, which, given everything we know about the lands between, may be exactly what happened. So who are they, exactly? The Crucible Knight armor gives us the answer. They served Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, and there were 16 of them in total, an elite so rarefied that their number never once exceeded that count. Not soldiers in any ordinary sense, not foot troops sent to die in someone else's war, but the chosen warriors of the First Lord himself, the finest fighters the lands between had to offer, each one standing as a monument to what the Golden Order was in the earliest days of its power, before it had softened into something that needed golden light and grand cathedrals to make its point. And what they wielded was the Crucible, not a weapon in the way a sword is a weapon, but something older and stranger than that, described as the primordial form of the Erdtree itself, the raw, vital essence from which all life once emerged before anyone thought to give it a name or a shape. This was the power that existed before the Golden Order refined the world, before it ordered and polished and smoothed everything into the version we walk through now. The aspects of the Crucible incantations make this explicit enough that there is little room left to argue with it. Each one is described as a manifestation of the Erdtree's primal, vital energies, an aspect of the primordial crucible where all life was once blended together indiscriminately. Tail, breath, tendrils, the aspects of creatures and beasts, of things that crawl and swim and coil in the dark. Life in its earliest, most fundamental, most untamed form, before it had settled into the neat categories the current age prefers. This is what the Crucible Knights carried inside them. This is what they wielded, and what they became a vessel for. And for a time, before the Erdtree ever cast its gold across the sky, this was considered the highest expression of divine power in the entire lands between. Then the Golden Order decided it was not. The Crucible Knot Talisman describes a bony knot that once grew on the human body, a vestige of the primordial crucible, and tells us that while it was once considered a signifier of the divine in ancient times, it is now increasingly disdained as an impurity as civilization advanced. That single item description contains the entire arc of what happened to the Crucible Knights. What was sacred became shameful. What was divine became impure. The Golden Order, in its pursuit of a cleaner, more ordered, more golden vision of the world, looked at the raw and ancient power of the Crucible and decided it had no place in the age it was building. The omens make the consequence of that decision impossible to miss. These are creatures touched by the Crucible directly, born with horns and the aspects of beasts still visible on their bodies, and the world does not wait for them to grow up before deciding what they are. They are shunned from birth. Their horns are cut away in a process most of them do not survive, and the ones who do live on hidden underground or pressed into service as muscle for people who would never sit at the same table with them, hunted still by those who make it their business to finish what the horn cutting started. Even Marika's own children were not exempt. Morgott and Mohg, born Omen, were sealed beneath the very city their mother ruled, kept from ever openly claiming the blood of the first Elden Lord that ran through them, because that blood carried the touch of something the Golden Order had already decided was unfit to walk anywhere near its light. If this is what was done to the Queen's own sons, it is worth sitting with what that implies for 16 warriors whose entire purpose, whose entire identity, had been built around the very power the Order chose to condemn. The Crucible Knights were disbanded when Godfrey was exiled. Their order dissolved, their purpose stripped away, their ancient power now a source of scorn rather than reverence. 16 warriors, each one among the finest to ever walk the lands between, suddenly, without a lord, without a home, without a place in the world the Golden Order was building around them. And so, each one found their own way. One was locked in an everjail, imprisoned, likely for the crime of refusing to accept Godfrey's banishment quietly, sealed away in magical confinement, left to wait in isolation for a challenger to eventually come along. A warrior of that caliber reduced to a puzzle for travelers to solve. One found his way to Stormvale Castle, fighting under Godric, not out of loyalty to Godric himself, whose worth he almost certainly saw through clearly, but perhaps out of some residual sense of duty to the lineage, to the blood of Godwyn, son of Godfrey, however far removed and diminished that blood had become by the time it reached the grafted lord of Stormvale. Two made their way to Nokron, the eternal city buried beneath the surface of the lands between. One stands on the remains of a broken bridge, staring not into the void, but toward Mohg's palace in the distance, watching. Whether out of loyalty to the son of his exiled lord, or out of a desire to end the heresy that son had embraced, the lore does not say. Perhaps even the knight himself no longer knows. The other defends the waterfall basin alongside a companion, and just beyond them, deeper in the depths, lies the resting place of Godwyn the Golden, the first of the demigods to die. The golden son of Godfrey, the child of the first Elden Lord, lying dead in the roots of the world, and two Crucible knights standing between him and anyone who would disturb what remains. They could not save him in life. They guard him in death. In the deep-root depths, Crucible Knight Siluria stands before an ancient tree, possibly the husk of a minor Erdtree from a long-forgotten age. She is named, which alone sets her apart, one of only two Crucible Knights honored as foremost in their order, commander of the Tree Knights, wielder of Siluria's tree, a great spear imbued with the ancient holy essence of the primordial crucible. She chose this place, an ancient tree deep underground, far from the golden light of the Erdtree above, as if she found the closest thing left to what the world was before the Golden Order remade it, and decided to remain there. And in Volcano Manor, one knight threw off his allegiance entirely. Known only as Tanith's Knight, he turned his back on the Golden Order and pledged himself to the matriarch of a place dedicated to its destruction. Perhaps this was rage. Perhaps it was the only honest response available to him. The Golden Order scorned everything he was, everything he carried, everything the Crucible represented. Volcano Manor, at least, made no pretense of welcoming him. Two remain in Farum Azula, as we have already seen. One standing over a slain dragon, still guarding a battlefield long since gone cold. The other still fighting the beastmen, still fulfilling an order given so long ago that the Lord who gave it has been exiled, tarnished, and returned as something almost unrecognizable. They do not know, or they do not care. In Farum Azula, time does not move, and neither do they. The two who died before we ever arrived in the lands between are known to us only through a spirit-caller snail in the catacombs, which summons their shades to fight on its behalf. Two Crucible Knights, reduced to ghosts, conjured by a snail. Whatever end they met, it was not the end they deserved. And then there are the two commanders. Ordovus, found in the Oriza hero's grave, fighting alongside another knight, his greatsword still imbued with what the description calls the red tint of primordial gold. That detail is worth pausing on. Primordial gold, red-tinged, ancient, close in nature to life itself. The description suggests carefully but clearly that the brilliant gold of the Erdtree may itself be the abnormality, that what came before it, the raw and living gold of the Crucible, was something closer to what life actually is. And what the Golden Order built above it, that towering, shining, almost transparent golden light, may be a departure from nature, rather than its perfection. Both commanders are named after real time periods, the Ordovician and the Silurian eras, measured in hundreds of millions of years. It is a quiet signal embedded in their names. The Crucible Knights do not belong to the age of the tree. They belong to something far older, something that was here before the golden light and will perhaps remain after it fades. "16 warriors, each one carrying within them a power the Golden Order decided was impure, each one finding their own quiet corner of the lands between to occupy after their world was taken from them, some guarding, some fighting, some waiting, some defecting, all of them outlasting the order that cast them out. Every name is a confession, if you know how to read it. The Crucible Knights are named for something that predates the Golden Order, predates America, predates the Erdtree itself, a thing the current age has worked hard to bury and half succeeded. Start with the color. Ordovis and Siluria, the two knights held above the rest of their order, wear armor stained with a coppery red that has nothing decorative about it. Ordovis's greatsword says as much outright. That tint marks the nature of primordial gold, a gold said to sit close to life itself, not the pale amber that pours off the Erdtree today, something older, something with blood still in it. And blood, it turns out, was never a metaphor here. The Haligtree was watered with Miquella's own blood from the moment it was a sapling, and the game frames this as correct procedure, not desperation, as if Miquella had simply done the reading and known what a tree like this actually needs. Walk to the base of any minor Erdtree, and you will find the evidence waiting in plain sight. Shattered warrior jars, vessels built to hold the blood of the dead, broken open so their contents could soak into the roots. The Erdtree avatars standing guard over these sites may not be protecting them so much as maintaining them, feeding a hunger that never went away. So, blood fed the Crucible, blood fed the trees the Crucible produced, and blood is red, which makes the shift from red gold to amber gold something more deliberate than time and weathering. The mending rune of the Death Prince tells us the Golden Order itself was founded on an act of removal, the extraction of destined death, a rune that burned deep red, pulled from the Elden Ring and locked away. Death left, and the red went with it. What remains is a gold with something missing from its center, purified in the specific sense that purification always implies a subtraction. That subtraction had a cost that went beyond color. The Crucible was never a peaceful place. It was blending in competition, life devouring life, death folding back into the soil as food for the next round of growing. Malekith's armor puts it plainly. Champions knew exactly what was at stake, and that knowledge was the thing that made them champions. Take death out of the equation, and the pressure that forged raw life into something worth the name starts to cool. The Crucible was not simply where life came from. It was the force that kept life sharp. Even its shape says as much. Ordovis channels the Crucible through a spinning vortex attack, and Siluria answers with a spear wrapped in its own coil of wind. The spiral keeps showing up wherever the Crucible does, And it shows up again at Fair Missoula, a city held inside a storm that never resolves, where stepping into the vortex at its center pulls you backward to Placidusax, an Elden Lord who ruled in the age before the Erdtree existed at all. 2 spirals, 1 force, the churning, death-fed engine of life the Golden Order chose to seal shut rather than let keep turning. And look at what happened to everyone still carrying a piece of that engine in their own body. The omens are born with horns and tails, the crucible written straight into their flesh, and the world condemns them before they can even understand why. Their horns are removed in a process that kills most of them, and the survivors are hidden underground or armed and used as muscle by people who will never sit at their table. The misbegotten fare no better, described as living punishment for contact with the crucible, enslaved across the length of the lands between. Whatever the crucible touches, the Golden Order marks unclean. But none of it actually disappeared. It only went underground, literally and otherwise. It survives in the red of Ordovis's blade, in the horns of every omen locked beneath the capital, in the misbegotten still working the ruins above them, in the 16 crucible knights scattered across a world that no longer wants what they carry. The incantations are still castable. The tail, the breath, the scales, none of it left. It was only told to stop showing itself in daylight. Which means the gleaming. Erdtree of the present is not the original thing, but a copy, with the dangerous parts filtered out. Red traded for amber, blood traded for light, death traded for permanence, and everything about it that reads as divine reads that way precisely because the life has been drained out first. The jars at the roots sit broken and empty now. The knights were scattered to the far corners of the map. The omens were buried. The misbegotten were chained. Death itself was sealed atop the mountaintops of the giants, behind guards thick enough that no one has reached it since. The Golden Order was built the same way you sand down a rough edge, by removing whatever didn't fit the shape it wanted, and Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, proves it in the end. Stripped of his grace, he covers himself in beast blood and tears the ground apart with his bare hands, shedding centuries of golden ceremony to become again exactly what he always was underneath it, a warrior of the Crucible, a man made of red gold. The Golden Order called all of this impure. The Crucible had a simpler word for it: life. High above the lands between, where the air grows thin and the cold cuts through everything, sits the Forge of the Giants. It is easy to look at it and see only what it is now, a vessel for a dangerous and ruinous flame sealed away by Marika after the war that established the age of the Erdtree, guarded by the last surviving member of her race she nearly exterminated, a threat contained, a sleeping danger. But the word forge carries meaning that the Golden Order would prefer you forget. A forge is a place of making, of craft, of civilization. The giants built it, and the giants were builders. Long before Marika ever set foot on the mountaintops, the giants lived there, and they were not alone. The Sword of Night and Flame tells us that astrologers, people who preceded even the sorcerers of Raya Lucaria, established themselves on those same mountaintops, as close to the sky as possible, and considered the fire giants their neighbors. This is not the description of a savage and mindless race. The giants coexisted with these star-studying people because the flame and the study of the stars did not clash. Where there was no conflict of purpose, the giants had no quarrel. They had driven the ice dragons from the mountaintops before any of this, claiming the highest peaks as their own through force. But having claimed it, they built. The hammer item description tells us that the art of smithing originated amongst the giants. The trolls' ceremonial smithing hammers tell us that this craft was considered divine, inseparable from the fire of their god. Sacred in the way that only a practice born directly from a god's power can be. They forged jewelry, chains that still hang across the mountaintops today, architecture that still stands in the ruins above the clouds. These were not beasts, these were a people. But their god was not a god of creation. The fell god, a one-eyed being of fire and destruction, so inexorably linked to his chosen people that he literally lived within them. The flame of the fell god incantation tells us plainly that the fell god still lurks within the fire giants. He is part of them, imprinted on their very physiology, present in every single one. And the curse he laid upon them was not a punishment, but a purpose. The Burn, O Flame incantation tells us that the fire giants were cursed to serve as keepers of the flame for eternity, bound to their duty as custodians of the ruinous fire, whether they willed it or not. Consider what that means. The giants did not simply worship their god. They were his vessels, his instruments, his eternal servants. Every fire giant that ever lived was born into a covenant they never chose, bound to tend a flame that could never be extinguished, in service of a one-eyed god of destruction whose face stared out from their own bodies. And that flame was a direct threat to the Erdtree. The Giant's Flame incantation makes it explicit. The flame of ruin is capable of burning the Erdtree. The Golden Order, building itself around the supremacy of that golden tree, could not tolerate this. The flame and the tree were incompatible forces, and only one could define the age. A prophecy captured in the incantation Fire's Deadly Sin told of a prophet who despaired looking up at the Erdtree, knowing that soon the kindling would burst into flame and bring ruin. This prophecy was seen not once, but repeatedly by multiple prophets across the history of the Golden Order, each one banished for the crime of saying what they had witnessed. The prophet Blindfold tells us they were persecuted and driven from their homes. The Golden Order did not want the prophecy spoken, but it could not stop the prophets from seeing it. And so Marika turned her eyes to the mountaintops, and with Godfrey at her side, the war began. It was not a war of equals. The forces of the Erdtree came prepared in a way that speaks to Marika's calculated intelligence. Weapons honed with stones from polar regions, specifically chosen to counteract the power of fire. Giant crusher hammers built to shatter the bones of massive foes. The incantation, Flame, Protect Me, one of the most ancient in the Fire Monk's canon, developed specifically during this war to shield the champions of the Erdtree from the giants' burning power. Every weakness was studied, every counter was prepared. And then came the allies, the Zamor, a warrior people who had been the mortal enemies of the fire giants since time immemorial. Their armor imbued with biting freezing winds, their blades styled after ice. Fire and ice, incompatible since the beginning. The Zamor had been fighting the giants long before the Erdtree existed, long before Marika was chosen as Empyrean, long before any of the current age had a name. They saw in this war simply the final opportunity to destroy what they had always sought to destroy, and they joined. And then came the betrayal. The trolls, descended from giants, carrying giant blood. They took up golden swords and turned on their own kin. The sword monument on the mountaintops records it in 4 words: Champions battle, trolls betray. The cavity in every troll's abdomen where the fell god's face once lived in their ancestors is now empty, hollow. When they renounced their god and sided with the golden swords of the Erdtree, something left them, and what remained was diminished. They became lesser things, reduced over time from proud and powerful giants to the lumbering pack mules we find pulling carriages across the lands between. Their golden sword description noting that they are losing their minds, becoming more bestial with each passing age. They chose the winning side and paid for it, slowly over centuries, in the currency of what they once were. The giants fell, one by one, impaled by thorn sorceries that grew from beneath the earth, piercing their bodies, splitting them apart from the inside. You can see them still on the mountaintops, enormous frozen figures with massive thorned stakes growing through their chests and limbs, some of them literally losing limbs to the violence of it. The Briars of Sin spell tells us that the guilty, blinded by thorns, discovered the Bloodstar in their darkness and learned to wield its power. These thorn sorcerers, exiled criminals marked by their crimes, turned their blood sorcery against the enemies of the tree and were rewarded with a purpose. Even heretics had their use. Then Marika realized something. The flame would not die. The one-eyed shield tells us she believed she could slay the fell god itself. And perhaps she did slay some physical form of it. But the fell god is not the kind of being that dies cleanly. It lurked within the flames of the forge. It lurked within the last surviving fire giant. It smoldered on the mountaintop, unkillable, unextinguishable. A sleeping dragon on the doorstep. And so, Marika did what any intelligent ruler does when confronted with a force she cannot destroy. She contained it. The remembrance of the fire giant tells us everything. Upon realizing the flames of their forge would never die, Queen Marika marked him with a curse. O trifling giant, mayst thou tend thy flame for eternity. The word trifling is worth pausing on. She did not spare him out of mercy. She spared him out of contempt and out of calculation. A giant that no longer poses a threat, stripped of his people, wounded, alone, cursed to stand watch over the flame forever. A free and powerful guardian for a flame she needed guarded. 2 purposes served with a single act of cruelty. Think about what that giant has endured. Standing on that mountaintop, surrounded by the frozen bodies of his people, tending a flame for a god who demanded it of him, for a conqueror who cursed him to it, for an eternity of solitude and defeat. He does not attack us because he wants to. He attacks us because he has no other purpose left. And when we defeat him, we are not just defeating an enemy. We are ending something that should have ended a very long time ago. But Marika was not finished. She sealed the mountain, declared it forbidden, set Malekith and his forces to guard the passes against anyone too curious about what lay beyond. And on the mountain itself, she established an order. Monks devoted entirely to the containment of the flame at its source. The fire monks in their earliest form. They were almost certainly nothing like what we find them in our time. The incantation "Flame, Protect Me," one of their founding incantations, is a spell of repelling, of defense against fire. These early monks were adherents of the Erdtree, afraid of the flame's power, dedicated to keeping it sealed. The banners inside their stronghold bear the symbol of the two fingers. They were of the Golden Order through and through. But the "Whirl, O Flame" incantation tells us what happened over time. Fire beguiles those who look upon it. Those who would guard the flame would also come to worship it. The fire monk ashes describe a stout monk who was first in flame incantations and steeled against fire, yet after many years of solemn duty had succumbed to its allure. The fire monk's armor description captures the psychology of it in a single sentence. Taboos transform into lasting obsessions by virtue of the fear that they inspire. And so, the monks became what we find them, part guardian, part worshipper, their robes covered in flame imagery, their weapons shaped like fire, their flame chariots built in the image of giants, orange-bearded, the fell god's face upon their abdomen, as if by wearing the appearance of their ancient charge, they could understand it better, or perhaps control it, or perhaps simply become it. The balance they walked was a philosophical one, expressed through their incantations. Every fire monk incantation burns the caster. Flame, cleanse me, heals, but leaves subtle burns. Flame, grant me strength, which does not burn the caster, is explicitly forbidden by the order. The philosophy is clear. Power drawn from the flame must cost the one who draws it. The moment it stops costing something is the moment it begins to corrupt. The prelates enforced this. Massive, stoic figures bearing cauldron helmets once filled with embers that erupted into flame when their faith reached its zenith. Wielding colossal hammers whose heft represents the weight of their guardianship. Carrying thorned whips described as instruments of fearsome religious encouragement. Prelate Birak severed his own head to make a point about his brother's laziness, leaving his head as a candle stand, his ginger beard visible beneath the helmet if you look carefully enough. A man so devoted to the philosophy of sacrifice that he made the ultimate sacrifice to remind others of theirs. And still it was not enough, because the flame has a way of finding the cracks. The Black Flame monks discovered the god-slaying black flame and abandoned their posts entirely, seduced by a power that could kill even gods. And then there was Aidan, thief of fire, a figure wearing ill-fitting prelate armor, which may have been his disguise, who walked into the deepest sanctum of the order and stole the flame of the fell god incantation right from under the chief guardian's nose. An incantation so dangerous that only the chief guardian himself was permitted to know of its existence. Aidan took it and fled to Liurnia, where a large contingent of fire monks followed, taking Fort Layard as a forward base of operations, hunting for what was stolen from them. By our time, Aidan is already imprisoned in an everjail, locked away by someone else. The monks searching for him do not know. They are still looking. And yet, for all the fire monks' devotion, and the prelate's stoicism, and the thorn sorcerer's blood magic, the flame never stopped burning. It was always going to find its way out eventually. The prophecy said so. Prophet after prophet saw it, and was banished for saying it. But the legacy of the giants does not end with the flame. It runs in blood. Every fire giant is red of hair, and Radagon of the Golden Order was said to have despised his own red locks. The giant's red braid, a weapon fashioned from the hair of the fire giant we slay, says it plainly. Perhaps that was a curse of their kind, not a comparison, not a metaphor, a direct implication that Radagon, the most devoted champion of the Golden Order, greatest hound of the Erdtree, was of the blood of its oldest and most hated enemies. Think about what flows from that blood. Melania, the greatest swordsman of the age, perhaps of any age. Rykard, who looked at the Golden Order and decided to devour it whole. Radahn, the scourge of the stars, who held back the heavens themselves through sheer strength of will. And Ranni, once red-haired, now housed in a doll, reaching toward a future entirely of her own making. The children of Radagon, children of the Erdtree's greatest champion, children perhaps of the blood of the giants. Marika destroyed the giants. She cursed the last one to an eternity of solitude. She sealed the flame atop the mountain and set an entire religious order to guard it. She did everything a god could do to ensure the Age of Fire was finished. And yet, the Forge of the Giants still stands on that mountaintop, silent and smouldering. It was always destined to burn the Erdtree. It only needed a hand to deliver it. Not every rejection of the Golden Order came through war. The Giants fought. The Crucible Knights were disbanded and scattered. The Omens were driven underground. But there is a group in the lands between whose departure from the Golden Order left almost no trace in the historical record. No war, no banishment, no sword monuments commemorating the conflict. They simply walked away. The ancestral followers. Find them in Siofra River, in Nokron, wandering alone in the Lake of Rot, always underground, always at a distance from the Erdtree's influence. Their item descriptions repeat this almost like a refrain. The ancestral spirit is a phenomenon beyond the purview of the Erdtree. The ancestral followers live at a distance from the Erdtree. As if the Erdtree's presence was a coordinate they specifically oriented themselves away from. The first impression they give is of an ancient people, enormously tall and muscular, with long arms and small heads, clothes made from leather and fur and animal pelts, weapons fashioned from jawbones and horns, surrounded by animals that follow them unafraid, as if the boundary between human and nature has dissolved entirely. The ruins they inhabit are ancient. The pillars they light to summon their spirits are ancient. Everything around them breathes age, but none of that makes them ancient. The word ancestral does not mean old, it means relation. Something can be ancestral and recent, just as something can be ancient and leave no ancestral connection behind. When you look for actual evidence of the ancestral followers in the history of the lands between, something striking happens. You find nothing. Not a single weapon description placing them before the Erdtree. Not a line of dialogue from any character acknowledging them as an ancient people. No sword monuments, no interactions with the giants, the Nox, the Beastmen, or any other pre-Erdtree civilization. Miriel, the keeper of the Church of Vows, who carries more knowledge of the world's history than almost any other character in the lands between, makes no mention of them at all. Every other culture that predates the tree leaves some kind of evidence. Faramazula leaves ruins across Limgrave and Liurnia. The Nox leave their architecture buried beneath the surface. The giants leave their forge and their frozen bodies on the mountaintops. The ancestral followers leave nothing behind in any place they do not currently inhabit, because they were never there. The one item that places them in any timeline at all is the spiral horn shield, which describes a tarnished warrior who cultivated close ties to the ancestral followers. Tarnished, a status that only exists after the Erdtree. Once again, the ancestral followers are placed in relation to the Erdtree, not before it. They did not predate the Golden Order, they departed from it. And were horns on their heads, those enormous horns that seem so ancient and bestial, are not growing from their skulls. They wear them. Remove the headband, and there is nothing underneath. No sprouting, no physical connection to the Crucible or to any primordial power. Just people who chose to wear the symbols of what they believe in, the way any member of any faith adorns themselves with the symbols of their devotion. So who are they, and why did they leave? The answer is in what they rejected. The ancestral follower ashes tell us they eschew letters and metalwork. In any other world, this would simply mean they are a pre-literate hunter-gatherer society. In the lands between, it means something else entirely. Letters, or runes, the power to alter the laws of nature itself. There is a moment in Nokron where climbing into a humble coffin beside a waterfall causes it to rise, carried upward by runes appearing in the air, reversing the encompassing power of gravity for the entire height of an enormous waterfall. Runes are technology for bending reality. To reject letters in the lands between is to reject the power to rewrite the rules of the world. And metalwork. Gold can halt the progress of rot. Copper can channel the will, allowing weapons to move by thought alone. Silver is bound to rebirth itself, to the renewal of the soul in another body. To reject metalworking in the lands between is to reject control over life and rebirth. These are not primitive choices. They are philosophical ones, made with full awareness of what is being refused. The ancestral followers know what runes can do. They know what metalwork can do, and they have looked at both and said no. Not because they cannot access these powers, but because accessing them would mean imposing their will on nature, and their entire belief system is built on the conviction that nature must not be imposed upon. Nature provides. Trust it. Respect it. Take what it furnishes and use it as it comes, blunt or sharp, living or dead. Do not sharpen what nature gave blunt. Do not alter what nature gave whole. The jawbone axe forgoes a bladed edge. The arrows use teeth that are naturally sharp. If nature provides something blunt, it is meant to be used as a bludgeon. If it provides something sharp, it is meant to cut. The ancestral followers do not improve on what they are given, because to improve on it would be to suggest that nature made a mistake. And at the center of this philosophy, more sacred than anything else, is death. The Golden Order sealed the rune of death. It removed death from the natural cycle, took control of what happened to souls after they left the body, and directed that energy back to the Erdtree. For most of the lands between, this was simply the new order of things accepted, or at least endured. But for a people whose entire belief system revolves around the sacredness of the natural life and death cycle, the sealing of death was to them a desecration. The ancestral spirit's horn says it most clearly. Thus does new life grow from death, and from death one obtains power. This is a literal description of how they understand the world to work. Death returns energy to the cycle. Life grows from what death leaves behind. The mushrooms they forage grow from decay. Their weapons are made from the remains of dead creatures. Their clothes are pelts. Their bow is made from horns. Death provides constantly and generously for those willing to trust it. And their faith in this principle is not passive. The winged greathorn is made to reap the lives of those who experience no sprouting. Those who have been cut off from the natural cycle of life and death, who neither grow nor return to the earth, are to be harvested. The ancestral followers do not simply withdraw from the Golden Order. They hold a philosophical position that places the undying, the controlled, the unnaturally preserved outside the order of things that should be allowed to continue. Look at how they chant around the remains of the ancestral spirit before the boss fight. Not around a living creature, around a corpse, singing to death, waiting for what death will produce. And when they enter the spirit's domain, the floor around them is covered in sprouting fungi, new life pushing up through plant and animal remains. Life from death everywhere. Always life from death. The ancestral spirit itself is the purest expression of their philosophy made manifest. It looks skeletal, gutted, its chest cavity hollow and open, more death than life in its appearance. And yet it is enormously powerful. During the fight, when it is brought low, it draws the energy of the surrounding spirit animals into itself. They fall dead, and from their death, the ancestral spirit is restored, its horns glowing with new power. Life from death, demonstrated in the middle of combat. It can even appear to die itself, crumpling to the floor in what looks like dying, only to emerge from one of the spirit animals in the room, bursting from its body, manifesting anew in the air. Its attacks change depending on which creature it has inhabited. Its cry changes. The nature of the beast it consumed becomes part of what it now is. This is their worldview, made literal and alive and dangerous. In a world full of factions fighting over who controls life and death, who gets to decide what happens after the body fails, the ancestral followers have a simpler answer. Nobody. Nature decides. Nature has always decided, and any civilization arrogant enough to believe it can do better than nature has somewhere in its foundations already begun to build its own pyre. The Golden Order was built on an absence. When Marika forged the current age, the rune of death was plucked from the Elden Ring and sealed away. Life would no longer return naturally to the earth. Death would be managed, directed, controlled. The Age of Plenty could begin, the Erdtree's sap flowing freely, its bounty dripping from every bough. An age of unrestrained vitality built on the foundation of a missing piece. But you cannot remove something from the world and expect it to stay gone. Shadows do not disappear because you refuse to look at them. The rune of death was sealed, but the greater will, that vast and increasingly silent force that cares only that some form of order exists, had already looked ahead, and it had chosen someone to carry what Marika had removed, the Glomide Queen. To understand what she was, you first have to understand what it means to be an Empyrean. Ronnie describes it plainly. Each Empyrean is chosen by their own two fingers as a candidate to succeed the current god and usher in a new age. Melania was born with scarlet rot inside her, and was still chosen because the greater will considered an age of rot a valid form of order. The Dung Eater and Gold Mask two figures more different from each other than almost any two beings in the lands between, were both guided toward mending runes that could repair the Elden Ring. Because the Greater Will does not discriminate between beautiful orders and terrible ones. It wants order, any order. The specific shape of it is a detail. The Glomide Queen was chosen to bring an age of death. Her rune was the literal inversion of Marika's, the shadow to Marika's light, the death to her life, where the age of plenty was defined by unrestrained vitality, by sap dripping from boughs, by Godfrey's amber, and the bounty of a real living tree. The Glomide Queen represented the complete mirror of all of it, death returning to the world, the cycle completing itself. The thing that had been plucked from the Elden Ring restored to its rightful place, not through negotiation, but through force. She carried this power through a sword, the Godslayer's greatsword, shaped in the image of the rune of death itself. Turned point down, it traces the same form as that forbidden rune. The black flame that the apostles wield is channeled directly through it, the sword acting as a medium between the queen and the power of destined death. The Godskin noble robe description tells us the black flame could once slay gods. This was not metaphor. The flame carried within it the metaphysical weight of the rune of death, and when that weight was brought to bear on a god, the god died. The age in which this happened matters. The fire monks, established after the war with the giants to guard the flame of ruin on the mountaintops, began to defect. We find black monks operating alongside Godskin apostles in various locations. Monks who abandoned their charge and dyed their robes, drawn to a power they saw as something greater than the ruinous flame they had spent their lives guarding. Fire touched by the rune of death, a god-killing flame for men already bewitched by the power they were supposed to contain. This was an irresistible escalation. They joined the Glomide Queen's cause, and their defection tells us something important about the timing. The fire monks only existed after the sealing of the Flame of Ruin, which came after the war with the giants. The Godskin apostasy happened after that, but it also happened before the Night of the Black Knives, because it was after the Night of the Black Knives that Malekith sealed destined death within his own flesh, stripping the black flame of its god-killing power. The Godskin movement was alive, and at the height of its power, somewhere in between these two events, most likely in the twilight of the Age of Plenty, when the Erdtree still stood as a real living tree, and the ancient Crucible era was drawing toward its close, and Malekith had not yet sealed anything. In those days, he was not the creature of confinement we know. He was death incarnate, openly wielding the rune of death in his blade, becoming death itself in battle. It was this version of Malekith that faced the Glomide Queen. Not the restrained and hidden Garank, but the full and terrible force of death in service of Marika, fighting fire with fire, the rune of death in his blade against the black flame of the apostles. But before we reach that confrontation, consider what the Glomide Queen was raising. The Godskin swaddling cloth carries an image that lodges itself in the mind. The Glomide Queen cradles newborn apostles, swaddled in cloth made from supple skin sewn together. Soon they will grow to become the death of gods. These are not recruits. They are not humans who found the movement and joined its cause. They are born into it, swaddled by the Queen herself from their first moments of existence, raised for for a single purpose. The black flame is not something they learn to wield. The black flame's protection incantation tells us that the queen embraced each apostle, and the black flame became their armor from within. It is part of them before they can choose anything. It is what they are. Their physiology tells the same story. Pale, malleable, clay-like skin, identical in appearance, like products of the same process rather than individuals shaped by different lives. They can stretch and contort in ways living flesh should not permit, their bodies yielding to impossible shapes, as if the material they are made from has different rules than ordinary human tissue. The silver tears of the eternal cities are described in similar terms, liquid beings that can mimic other forms, born from alchemical manipulation in the chalices of the Nox. The Dragonkin soldiers were born in the eternal city, where there is no sky and no true lightning. The Albinaurics were potentially their creation as well, pale and artificial, never touched by the Erdtree's grace, because they did not grow from the cycle of life and death the Erdtree manages. And the glow-eyed queen herself came from the same people. Numen, kin to Marika, from a society with a long history of creating life by hand, rather than waiting for nature to provide it. An Empyrean, drawn from the same stock as the current god. Raised in a matriarchal tradition where the moon and the feminine were inseparable concepts, where women of power were not unusual but expected. Whatever her specific identity, she built her army from the same tradition of manufactured life that the eternal cities have been practicing since before the Erdtree existed. Yet the Godskin movement was not in the shape of an army. It was a religion. They are called apostles. They have a prayer book. Their powers require faith. Their sigil cast every time they appear or cast their incantations is the eye of the gloam-eyed queen, a sacred emblem worn like the eye of Horus, protective and holy. The gaze of their Messiah figure turned outward against the divine hierarchy they sought to dismantle. The Noble Presence incantation calls it a god hunt. This is their holy purpose, their religious crusade, their sacred obligation. They do not negotiate. They do not compromise. They were born to this doctrine, and the black flame was placed inside them before they could form any other belief. And the skinning is theology. The robes they wear are made from godskin. The godskin noble's chest piece has 7 face aprons, each one a god reduced to material worn as clothing, tanned godhead. The item description simply tells us, to skin your enemy and wear them is the ultimate declaration that their divinity was never real. You are not sacred. You are not untouchable. You are flesh. And flesh can be peeled away and used for shoes, for trousers, for an apron. The gods of the lands between, those powerful and supposedly divine beings, were being worn as garments by creatures raised specifically to make that point. No wonder Marika feared them. The psychological weight of it alone, the knowledge that your skin might one day adorn the robe of an apostle, would have struck terror into every demigod in the lands between. There is also the serpent. The serpent has been the enemy of the Erdtree since before anyone can clearly remember. Even in the time of Godfrey, gladiatorial combat featured bronze effigies of the snake being beaten into the dirt, audiences cheering its destruction. A hatred so old and so ingrained that it became entertainment. The serpent hunter spear was used to hunt an immortal great serpent in the distant past, long before Rykard became the serpent of blasphemy, meaning there was a serpent crisis in the ancient history of the Erdtree, that made the serpent its eternal enemy. And the Godskin nobles have serpentine tails. Perhaps this is coincidence. Perhaps it is not an alliance between the glow-eyed queen and the great serpent, death and corruption joining forces against the tree of life would explain both the ancient hatred directed at the serpent and the serpentine physiology of the most ancient apostles. The serpent that tempts, that coils around the sacred tree, that desires its destruction, aligning itself with an Empyrean whose entire purpose was to end the age of life. A cut line of dialogue that would have played during the burning of the Erdtree says it plainly. The rune of death is unbound. Black flames have devoured the Erdtree. What the Tarnished accomplishes with the flame of ruin tempered by destined death, the glow-eyed queen may have been trying to accomplish with the black flame alone. A combination of fire and the rune of death, which is exactly what the black flame is. The first burning of the Erdtree, the event that ended the Age of Plenty and left only a phantom tree glowing above Lanedale. The event whose ash still blankets the capital when we arrive. This may be its cause, but Malekith stopped it. Death incarnate against the black flame. The rune of death wielded openly in his blade, a weapon imbued with destined death before he would ever think of sealing it. He personally defeated the glow-eyed queen and decimated her apostles, as the item descriptions of the Godskin apostle robe and the Godslayer's greatsword both imply. And his reputation, that terrifying legacy that no demigod did not fear him, was born from this victory. Gerank's Beastclaw incantation hints at it before we understand what it means. Long ago, Gerank was a beast of such terrifying ferocity that his former name meant death of the demigods. His former name, Malekith, the title he earned by destroying the very movement that sought to make god-killing its holy purpose. With the queen defeated, the black flame lost its most dangerous quality. The scouring black flame tells us its true power was lost when Malekith sealed destined death within his flesh, which came later after the Night of the Black Knives. But the movement was already broken. The apostles were scattered, their ranks decimated, their queen gone. Whatever they had been at the height of their power, temples and shrines, and a religious hierarchy spreading the doctrine of death across the lands between, all of it was reduced to survivors pursuing their own quiet agendas. We find them still at their work. One guards the Godslayer's greatsword at the base of Caelid's divine tower, alongside a black monk, the most sacred relic of their movement, protected to the last. One has manipulated an entire village into holding a skinning festival, manufacturing fresh skin for a creed that never stopped believing in its purpose. One stands near Rani's curse mark of death in the Liurnia divine tower, perhaps sensing the fragment of the rune of death that lingers there, still reaching for the power that was taken from them. Two haunt Farum Azula, shockingly close to where Malekith and the rune of death itself reside, their purpose there as clear as anything in the lands between. One sits in Volcano Manor alongside Rykard, a natural alliance, both wanting the same thing, the Erdtree broken and its age ended. And Melina, burned and bodiless, her eyes sealed, searching for the purpose given to her by her mother inside the Erdtree, the burn scars on her hands, the sealed eye with its tattoo of talons, its purple hue identical to the beast eye that Gerank gives us to track fragments of the rune of death, a colour that belongs to the Glow-eyed, not to any ordinary being. In the frenzied flame ending, when the rune of death is finally unbound in the world, and she survives long enough to witness it, her eye opens. The eye was sealed like the rune of death was sealed, and when the rune of death was freed, the eye was freed with it. Once she was the shadow of the Golden Order, the death to Marika's life, the black flame to the age of plenty's abundance. Defeated, burned, reduced to a bodiless spirit carrying a purpose she was given inside the very tree she once tried to burn. Marika's prisoner, Marika's instrument, the gloam-eyed queen in service of the god she was meant to replace, directed toward an ending that would finally bring death back into the world. She burns herself. She burns the Erdtree, not as destruction for its own sake, but as the one act she has always been built for: death, returning to a world that had been holding it back for too long. The black flame is not evil. It is not destruction without purpose. It is the natural end of things, the destined death that was sealed away at the founding of the Golden Order, the shadow that was cut off from the golden light and sent wandering through history in search of the moment it was always meant to arrive. And in the end, one way or another, it always does. Our most learned sorcerers have long understood that life is not a phenomenon exclusive to this world. They study the stars, and through their glintstone arts, they have come to a fundamental conclusion. The great sorcerer Selen explained it with perfect clarity. Glintstone is the amber of the cosmos. Golden amber contains the remnants of ancient life and houses its vitality, while glintstone contains residual life and thus the vitality of the stars. The heavens, it seems, are brimming with a form of existence, and the glintstone that falls to our world is a direct link to that celestial life. This knowledge gives weight to a far older belief, one held by those who follow the path of madness. Through the maddening touch of the frenzied flame, the blind maiden Hyetta was granted a vision of the beginning. She spoke of a time, before souls and separations. All that there is came from the one great, she revealed. Then came fractures and births and souls. In her vision, all life was once a single connected whole, an existence without individuality, without pain or purpose as we know it. This unified existence was shattered. The force responsible for this monumental act of division was the greater will. It imposed an order on the one great, breaking it apart into the countless forms of life we see today. But in doing so, Hyetta claims the greater will made a mistake. Torment, despair, affliction, every sin, every curse, every one born of the mistake. This is the core belief of the frenzied, that our very existence as separate beings is a flaw. They believe this is why their cleansing flame is so powerful, for it seeks to unmake the world of individuals and melt all away until all is one again, restoring the original state of being. To enact its grand design and oversee this new world of fractured life, the greater will sent its agents from the sky. One such agent, a being known as Metter, descended upon the lands between on a falling star. Much like the Elden beast that would later become the core of the Elden Ring, Metter's purpose was to serve as the primary vessel for the greater will's words, a direct link to the power that had reshaped existence. From her own body, she then gave birth to the beings known as the Two Fingers, who inherited her ability to receive these celestial commands. These children of Meter, the Two Fingers, became the guides for the burgeoning age of the Erdtree. For generations they have been the arbiters of destiny, their silent counsel shaping the course of history. It was the Two Fingers who selected Marika and guided her journey to godhood. It is these same beings who now sit in silent communion, pointing toward the Erdtree, intending to guide a tarnished champion to the throne of Elden Lord. Their authority comes from their supposed direct connection to the creator of our age, the greater will itself. Yet a journey into the hidden lands of shadow has uncovered a devastating truth. Meter, the Mother of Fingers, the original link to the heavens, has long been forsaken. She lies dormant and unresponsive, her connection to the greater will severed for an age. This discovery throws the entire foundation of the Golden Order into question. If the Prime Messenger has received no word for so long, how can her children, the Two Fingers, claim to be speaking on the greater will's behalf? Are their movements and commands merely old, remembered directives from a bygone era? Is their guidance for a new Elden Lord based on a plan that is centuries out of date? This revelation forces us to consider a more disquieting possibility. Perhaps the greater will has not just abandoned its messengers, but has abandoned all of us. Or more troubling still, perhaps the great power that first fractured life has faded from existence entirely, leaving us to follow the commands of a long-dead authority. The silence from the heavens is absolute, and we are left to wonder what, if anything, is guiding our fate. Count Ymir is not a man who speaks lightly. When he tells us that we began as stardust, born of a great rupture far across the skies, he is not speaking in metaphor. He means it literally. We are children of the greater will, he says, and the study of the stars is, at its root, the study of ourselves. The item left behind by Ymir, the beloved stardust, captures something of how he approached this truth. He was known for his recitations, and the item tells us that one need only envision the romance of the stars above, with adoration for stardust in one's heart, to become a great sorcerer. Do so, and you will know love. This is not the language of cold scientific inquiry. Ymir looked at the same stars that other sorcerers analyzed, and felt something closer to recognition. The cosmos was not a subject of study, it was home. What Ymir describes is a great rupture, a single explosive event that scattered everything outward, stars and life and all of it, across the vastness of space. Selen told us that glintstone contains the vitality of the stars, that it is the amber of the cosmos, preserving residual life, the way amber preserves an insect caught in resin. What Ymir adds to this is the connection we had not yet made. If glintstone holds the life of the stars, and we too came from the same rupture that produced those stars, then glintstone does not merely contain alien life, it contains something ancestral to us. Every sorcerer who has ever held a piece of glintstone and studied the light within it has been, without knowing it, studying their own origin. This reframes everything the primeval sorcerers were doing. Selen and her companions, Lusat and Azur, peered into the primeval current, that forbidden tradition of glintstone sorcery that points toward the deepest and most distant source of all life. Both Lusat and Azur came back from this experience fundamentally broken. their minds shattered by whatever they witnessed at that depth. The Graven School talisman tells us that the primeval sorcerers collected others into themselves, fashioning them into the seeds of stars, pursuing what it calls another path of scientific inquiry. Selene herself eventually became one of these graven masses, a horrifying amalgam of compressed sorcerers, an ignoble end for the woman who taught us the basics of the glintstone arts. It is easy to look at this and see madness, and it is madness in a certain sense, but Ymir's revelation changes the meaning of it. Selene was trying to become a star, and if we came from stars, then what Selene was attempting was not a delusion, it was a return. She wanted to go back to the place from which all life came, to dissolve back into the rupture that produced everything. The primeval current is not just a forbidden sorcery technique. It is the point in space where the one great shattered, where the greater will did whatever it did to break singular existence into the countless individual forms of life we see now. To look into it is to look at the moment of our own creation. And it broke the minds of those who tried. Hayeda's vision and Ymir's findings are at their core describing the same event from two different angles. Hayeda, touched by the three fingers, saw the fracturing of the one great as a mistake, something to be undone, the source of every sin and affliction that followed. Ymir, looking at the same event through the lens of glintstone study, sees something sublime, a burst of creative energy that produced stars and life and us. Both are correct. The fracturing was the beginning of everything we know, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. And the greater will that caused it has been silent ever since. And here, through a different path entirely, we arrive at the same destination. The Crucible, that primordial blending of all life before the Golden Order refined it away, was itself a concentration of what remained after the fracturing. Every life form that developed from the rupture represents a splinter of that original oneness, and the Crucible was where those splinters still overlapped, still touched each other, still shared something of the undivided state. This is why the Hornsent, studying the spiral current of the Crucible, attempted to push life back together, compressing it, concentrating it, trying to reassemble the divine power that had been dispersed across individual beings. The jars, the gate of divinity, the bodies used to construct it. All of this was an attempt to reverse the fracturing, to gather enough concentrated life in one place that the power of the one great could be briefly reassembled and poured into a single person. Whether that process actually worked is a question for another time. What matters here is the picture that emerges when you hold all of this together. Life began as one thing. It was broken apart. The pieces became stars, and from the stars came us. The greater will did this for reasons we cannot know, and then sent its agents to impose order on the result. The Crucible was what that order replaced. The Erdtree was what was planted in its place. And all of it, from the first rupture to the golden light above Lanedale, traces back to a single source that has not spoken in longer than anyone can say. Ymir knew this. He looked at the stars and felt love. He looked at the fingers and felt pity. And he spent his life trying to understand the shape of something that had already been broken apart long before he was born. Here is something worth sitting with The Golden Order fundamentalists, for all their rigidity and their cruelty toward anything that does not conform to their vision of life, are not entirely wrong. Everything is connected. Everything comes from the same source. The chain of causality that the fundamentalists believe links all life together is real. Where they go wrong is not in the observation, but in the conclusion they draw from it. They see the connection and decide it must be managed, ordered, directed through the Erdtree as the single point through which all life and death must flow. The observation is sound. The architecture they built around it is theirs alone. What Ymir and Selen reveal is that this connection runs deeper than the Golden Order ever acknowledged. Far deeper. The Carian tradition of celestial worship and the Erdtree faith have long seemed like opposing belief systems, one looking up at the stars, the other rooting itself in the golden tree that grows from the earth. But Ymir's hat carries a detail that reframes this entirely. The circular design at its top represents the greater will and its lightless abyss, and the description tells us that though Ymir instructed Rani in the sorceress arts, he eventually abandoned his allegiance to the moon. It was merely the closest of the celestial bodies, nothing more. The moon was a stepping stone, a nearby point of light that early celestial worshippers oriented themselves toward, because it was the most visible, the most immediate, the most reachable of the greater will's creations. But to someone who understood what Ymir understood, the moon was just a detail. The real object of study, the real object of reverence, was the lightless void behind it. The same void that the primeval sorcerers called the primeval current. The same void that broke the minds of Lusat and Azure when they looked into it directly. When those sorcerers peered into the abyss, they were not looking at empty space. They were looking at the birthplace of all life, the point where the one great shattered and scattered itself across everything that exists. No wonder it broke them. They were looking at the moment of their own creation, at a scale so vast that a mortal mind has no framework to hold it. Selen understood this too, or came to understand it. At the end of her quest, what she asks for is remarkable. She says, "Do you recall what once I told you? That glintstone is the amber of the cosmos, and sorcery is the study of the stars and the life therein. When you become Elden Lord, please illuminate me. Lay bare the secrets of life which course the Elden Ring. Next time, I will be your student." The woman who taught us the basics of glintstone sorcery, who spent her life pursuing the deepest secrets of the primeval current, is saying that the Elden Ring itself holds answers she has not yet reached, that becoming Elden Lord might grant access to something she has been circling her entire life. This also reframes Radagon. His attempt to reconcile faith and sorcery, the study of the stars and the worship of the Erdtree, has always seemed either visionary or contradictory, depending on who you ask. But if the celestial and the divine both trace back to the same source, then Radagon was not trying to bridge two separate things. He was recognizing that they had never actually been separate. The moon, the stars, the Erdtree, the Elden Ring, all of them downstream from the same rupture. All of them fragments of the one great, ordered and shaped by a greater will that looked at the scattered pieces of itself and decided to build something from them. And this is where the question becomes uncomfortable. The greater will shattered the one great. It broke the original unified existence into individual life, into stars, into us. It then sent Meta, and later the Elden Beast, to impose order on what it had created. But Hayata's vision calls this a mistake. Every sin, every curse, every affliction, everything that makes individual existence painful, she traces back to that original fracturing. The three fingers want to undo it, melt everything back into the one great and start over. Or rather, stop. No more individuals, no more order, no more mistake. What Ymir describes as sublime, a burst of creative energy producing stars and life and love, Hayata describes as the origin of all suffering. Both are looking at the same event. The greater will caused it, and the greater will has not spoken since. Whether it is dead or silent, or simply so far away that its last message has not yet finished travelling across the void, the result is the same. Everything built in its name, the Erdtree, the Golden Order, the Two Fingers, the Empyreans, the Tarnished guided back to become Elden Lord. All of it rests on instructions from something that may no longer exist in any meaningful sense. A star cluster that collapsed in on itself, leaving behind only the light that had already left before it died, still travelling, still arriving, still being interpreted as divine guidance by those who do not yet know the source has gone dark. The primeval sorcerers who looked into the primeval current and came back broken were not destroyed by madness. They were destroyed by clarity. They saw what the greater will actually was, what the rupture actually meant, what the lightless void at the center of all celestial worship actually contained, and they could not carry it. There is a theory about the greater will that sits differently from the others. Not a god in the traditional sense, not a distant ruler issuing commands from beyond the stars, but something stranger and sadder. The greater will was perhaps simply the consciousness of the one great itself, a sentience that existed when all life was unified, that began to fade the moment that unity was broken. Think about what that means. The rupture did not just scatter matter across the sky, it scattered the mind that had held it all together. Every star that formed from the debris carried a fragment of that original awareness. Every life that eventually coalesced from those stars carried an even smaller fragment. And with each generation of division, each new individual that separated itself from the whole, the greater will grew quieter, more distant, less able to speak in the clear and direct way it once could. Meta, the first shooting star to fall upon the lands between, may have arrived while that fading was still early, while the greater will had not yet dispersed so completely that communication was impossible. This would explain why she is called its daughter, a title that carries more weight than vassal. Even Marika, god of the current age, is a vassal. The Elden Beast, avatar of order in the lands between, is a vassal. Meta is a daughter, something born from the greater will directly, in the early period when it still had enough coherence to produce something that close to itself. And the form she and her children take, fingers, is not incidental, a hand reaching into the material world. The greater will, too dispersed to act directly, sending a hand instead. Fingers that could point, guide, receive, transmit. They are the literal mechanism by which something vast and increasingly incoherent tried to maintain contact with the world it had set in motion. The Staff of the Great Beyond tells us everything we need to know about how that contact eventually went. The Mother received signs from the greater will from beyond the microcosm. Despite being broken and abandoned, she kept waiting for another message to come. That rupture on Meta's back, that black hole-like void she carries, was her direct line. A wormhole connecting her to whatever lay beyond the observable world through which the Greater Will's signals once traveled. When she used it in combat, summoning forces from across space, she was drawing on the same mechanism that once allowed her to receive divine instruction, and when it swallowed her at the end of her fight, pulling her back into the void, it was as if the only connection she ever had to the Greater Will finally closed. Both Meta and the Elden Beast share this ability to open these ruptures in space. There is something significant in that. Both are fallen stars. Both carry this capacity to tear a hole in the fabric of things and reach through it. But the Elden Beast arrived later, after Meta had already established the groundwork. She was the scout, the advanced communication post, the being sent ahead to prepare a new mortal plane for the arrival of something immortal. And she waited long after the immortal thing arrived, long after the Elden Ring was set, and the Erdtree grew, and the Golden Order rose and fell, and cracked and shattered. Meta sat broken and abandoned in her finger-birthing grounds, still oriented toward the void, still waiting for a message that had stopped coming. The two fingers at the round table hold try to replicate what she once did naturally. They stand upright, orienting themselves like antennas toward the Greater Will. And Anaya tells us it will take thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of moons before they receive a response. This is the distance the Greater Will has traveled from the lands between, in every sense of the word. What Meta could once receive through her microcosm in something approaching real time now requires tens of thousands of moons to cross the void, if a response is coming at all. The Elden Beast and the Elden Ring are in this reading the greatest remaining concentrations of the Greater Will's power. Not emissaries of something currently active and watching, but relics of something that was once immense and has been fading ever since the rupture. Artifacts of a consciousness that scattered itself across the universe and has been growing quieter with every passing age. The two fingers have been operating without instruction for so long that they may no longer be capable of recognizing the difference between a genuine message and their own interpretation of one. They believe they are doing what the Greater Will would want. They may even be right, but there is no way to confirm it. No signal coming back through the void to verify that the choices they have made, the Empyreans they have raised, the orders they have shaped, the tarnished they have guided, any of it reflects something still being directed from beyond. It is just them in the silence, pointing at the void between the stars. Meta, the name itself, may carry the answer to what she is. In the oldest roots of language, the word for mother sounds very much like her name. And if that is intentional, then she is not merely the mother of the two fingers in a biological sense. She is something closer to the original mother, the first point of contact between the Greater Will and the mortal world, the being from which everything that followed was born. Her children, the two fingers and the finger creepers, came directly from her body, and their purpose to act as the voice of the divine in the material world is inseparable from what she was. She received the messages. They transmitted them. The entire chain of divine communication in the lands between flows from a single body that fell from the sky and gave birth to its instruments here on the ground. The finger ruins scattered across the land of shadow are the physical trace of where that body once was, and they are strange in a way that most ruins are not, because they were not built. The nailstone crafting item describes a flake-like stone shard found at the finger ruins, a piece that came loose from the tip of one of the column-like stone fingers that grew there. grew. Not stood, not was placed, grew. These formations are not architecture. They are something closer to a coral reef, alien material that spread itself across the places where Meta once nested, leaving behind calcified growths shaped like the fingers she produced. The cherishing fingers sorcery, which summons fingers to protect their mother, suggests that this connection between the form of fingers and the presence of Meta is not coincidental. The ruins grew where she was. They are, in some sense, still reaching toward her. And from these alien growths, other things grow in turn. The finger mushrooms are small pink fungi that sprout from the calcified stone of the finger ruins. Their description calls them the stillborn of the two fingers, organisms that emerged from the same alien material that produced the two fingers themselves, sharing their origin but falling short of what a true two fingers can only be born into from Meta directly. They are hallucinogenic. Whatever a terrestrial mind experiences when it consumes a fungus grown from this cosmic material, it is almost certainly not something that mind was built to process. The Finger Weaver's cookbook, left behind by a student of the finger ruins, notes that his brush with the sublime all but shattered his mind, though he was left capable enough to leave these few precious words. Just studying the ruins was enough to fracture him. Eating what grows from them would be something else entirely. And yet people did. People do. Because the lampreys that cluster around these ruins, those strange finger-like creatures that guard the stone growths and feed on them in some way the land does not fully explain, may be the result of exactly that. The glinting nail consumable describes them as resembling fingers far more than they do humans, and then asks why compare them to humans at all if they were never human to begin with. The comparison exists because they were indeed human. Look closely at their bodies, and you can see the remnants of clothing. Shreds of fabric wrapped around forms that have long since outgrown whatever shape they originally wore. These were people, once drawn to the finger ruins, consuming the fungi that grew there, and slowly becoming something the ruins recognized more than their own species did. The lampreys became what they pursued, and watching them, other people decided to pursue the same thing. The finger weavers studied them, imitated their sorcery, and followed their example toward whatever transformation awaited at the end of that path. To become a Two Fingers was to become semi-divine, a messenger of something vast and cosmic, a being whose words carried the weight of the greater will itself. In the age of the Golden Order, that status was enormous. The Two Fingers shaped the course of history. They selected gods. They raised Empyreans. They guided the tarnished. To become one of them would be to step outside the ordinary chain of mortal existence entirely, and enter something closer to the divine machinery of the world. None of them succeeded. The lampreys are as close as anyone has come, and they are not Two Fingers. They are something in between, neither the human they were, nor the cosmic being they reached toward. Feeding on alien stone in the ruins of a mother who stopped receiving messages long ago. The Finger Weaver's Cookbook ends with those few precious words its author managed to preserve before his mind gave out. We do not know what those words say. The description does not tell us. What it tells us is that something about this pursuit broke him, and that whatever he found at the end of it was worth trying to record. Even shattered and barely coherent, even knowing he would likely never be understood, Something about the finger ruins does that to people. Draws them in, breaks them open, leaves them reaching toward a mother who is not there anymore, toward a greater will that stopped answering long before any of them were born. The place where we fight meta should not fit where it is. Deep underground, where the weight of the earth above should press everything into tight and confined spaces. The finger birthing grounds open into something vast, a space that stretches further than it has any right to. The only other place in the lands between that does this is the arena where we face the Elden Beast. Another expanse that seems to stretch on forever, despite the physical constraints of where it sits. Two cosmic beings, two impossible spaces. The world bends around them both because they are not truly of it. They carry their own spatial rules with them, the way a star warps the space around it simply by existing. The tubes that line the finger birthing grounds are strange objects. They could be delivery mechanisms, channels through which Meta dispersed her children to different points across the lands between. They could be communication lines, giving her some way to remain in contact with the two fingers she had already sent out into the world, or with the greater will itself. Whatever their function, the name of the place tells us their most fundamental purpose. This is where the two fingers were born. This is where the hand of the greater will reproduced itself again and again, sending its instruments out into a world it could no longer directly reach. And Meta arrived here before any of it. A gleaming daughter of something vast and distant, landing among them, growing alien stone from the ground around her, giving birth to divine messengers. It is worth asking what those early people made of her, because the evidence suggests they made quite a lot. The divine towers, those enormous structures scattered across the lands between, each one housing a two fingers at its summit, were once called the Towers of Gods. Not Towers of the Two Fingers, Towers of Gods. The beings enshrined at their peaks were not seen as intermediaries or messengers, but as gods themselves. And the architecture of these towers does not match anything built by Faramazula civilizations. It predates both. Something else built them. Something that had contact with Meta and her children long before the Golden Order existed. The ancient meteoric ore greatsword gives us a clue, found in the forge called Starfall Past. This weapon is fashioned from a shard of an arrowhead that once formed part of the old god's arsenal. An arrowhead. The sword we carry was too small to be a weapon for whoever originally made it. It was the tip of an arrow, which means the beings who used it were enormous, large enough that what we call a greatsword was to them a piece of ammunition. The only skeletons in the lands between large enough to fit this description are the giant ones found scattered across Caelid and the mountaintops of the giants. Beings so large that early human societies would have had no choice but to call them gods. These old gods used meteoric ore, raw cosmic material, the same substance that fell from the sky with Meta before anyone in the lands between had learned to work iron or steel. The divine towers also have meteoric ore embedded in them, the same material, the same origin. And the stone golems that guard these towers, those ancient and largely unexplained constructs, may be their creations too. Telu the golem smith's ashes describe a stone golem who became the guardian deity of smithing, a golem operating one of the old forges worshipped as divine for the act of working. The hammer item description tells us that smithing originated among the giants, dying or shortly after Meta. Who used the cosmic material she brought with her? Who built the divine towers to house her children? Who invented smithing and considered it divine because it mirrored the creative act of a god? And who were eventually either destroyed or diminished into what we now call fire giants, leaving behind only their towers and their golems and their cosmic awe? The claymen of the underground palaces carry a different kind of connection to Meta. Their great oracular bubble sorcery produces a pulsing construct that ruptures outward, and the description of fleeting microcosm, the sorcery that recreates Meta's own black hole, uses strikingly similar language. Both bubble and rupture, both oracular, used for divination, for attempting to receive messages from beyond. The claymen, deep in their ancient underground dynasty, surrounded by malformed stars and serviced by oracles wielding meteoric harpoons, were trying to recreate the conditions of Meta's microcosm. They were trying to call the greater will. Building out of coral and alien stone and cosmic ore, a crude imitation of the receiver that Meta carried on her back, hoping to catch a signal that was already fading by the time they attempted it. And all of this, the towers, the golems, the claymen, the finger ruins, the lampreys, the finger weavers, trails back to Meta, and the question of what she represented to the world before the Erdtree took over. But Meta was not only a cosmic receiver and a mother of divine messengers. She was also upstaged. The gazing finger, crafted from her remembrance, carries an ash of war called Kowtower's resentment. She was resentful, loyal, obedient, the first to arrive, the one who prepared the ground. And then the Elden beast fell from a golden star, and everything shifted. The Elden beast had opposable thumbs. Meta did not. The Cinquedia tells us that 5 fingers are symbolic of the intelligence granted to the beastmen. The Elden beast, with its thumbs, is by this measure a more developed expression of the greater will's intent. Meta gazed vacantly into the beyond. The description says she was a receiver, a conduit, a mother. The Elden beast was something more capable, more fully realized, sent to replace what she had prepared. Meriga grew up in a village of shamans, an oppressed people ground down under the rule of the Hornsent, a race that used shaman flesh as the binding material for their constructed abominations, softening it first with toothed whips before incorporating it into their creations. The shamans had no horns, unlike their rulers, and they had a quality the Hornsent found useful and contemptible in equal measure: a particular relationship with trees. The grandmother of Shaman village became a tree after her death. Another shaman found in Bellarat was undergoing the same process. In Enir Ilim, there are trees that appear to be made of people, compressed shamans punished by a civilization that worshipped a spiral tree and found a horrible utility in the bodies of those who naturally became one. From this village, from this people, from this particular relationship with trees, came the woman who would plant the Erdtree. The finger ruins of Deo sit close to Shaman village, close enough that contact between a young Marika and a Two Fingers was almost inevitable, and the cerulean and crimson seed talismans found at the finger ruins depict the Two Fingers alongside an Erdtree seed, with a description that notes this age-old artifact perhaps dates back to the birth of the Erdtree. The Two Fingers may have given Marika the seed. The Erdtree may have grown from something the Fingers provided to a shaman girl from an oppressed people, because a shaman from a people who naturally became trees was the most receptive vessel available for the order they wanted to build. The Two Fingers have been cycling through Empyreans for as long as the Golden Order has existed. Marika, the gloam-eyed queen, Rani, Melania, Mikola, each one selected and raised up when the previous order began to crack. When Marika's order stagnated, the Two Fingers were already preparing replacements. They backed multiple candidates simultaneously. They do not put all their guidance into a single vessel, because they have learned across countless ages that every order eventually breaks. Corin handed the Two Fingers prayer book, calls it heresy, bearing no lineage from the Erdtree. This is technically correct. The Two Fingers and the Erdtree come from separate lineages. Meta spawned the Fingers and their incantations. The Elden Beast spawned the Elden Ring from which the Erdtree grew. Two cosmic lineages from the same divine entity, operating in the same world, each considering the other at least partially illegitimate. The spells that grant protection against holy damage, divine fortification and Lord's divine fortification, are incantations of the Two Fingers. Protection specifically against the kind of damage dealt by Malekith and the Elden Beast. The Two Fingers built defenses into their system against the very force their supposed allies wielded. That is a rivalry dressed in the language of shared purpose. Miriel, the Turtle Pope, once said that heresy is not native to the world. It turns out he was more literal than anyone realized. Both the Two Fingers and the Erdtree came from space. Nothing about the divine order of the lands between is truly of this place. It was all brought here, installed here, by forces that arrived on falling stars and then lost contact with whatever sent them. Ymir understood the full weight of this. He looked at everything the Two Fingers had built, everything Marika had built under their guidance, and said that the roots were rotten because the foundation itself was unsound. Marika was unsound. The fingers that guided her were unsound, and the truth lies deeper still. He said it is their mother who is damaged and unhinged. Gideon reached a similar conclusion by different means. The Lord's divine fortification description tells us he gained true knowledge after his long exchange with the Two Fingers, discovering all had been broken long ago, that the trembling fingers bent with age, and the Erdtree itself were no exception. This is why Gideon, whose entire life had been devoted to the Golden Order, could stand before us at the end and tell us to take no heed of cardinal sin. The Two Fingers lost their purpose a long, long time ago. The Nox may have reached it too. They created the Fingerslayer Blade, a weapon built specifically to kill a Two Fingers. This is not the act of people who simply disagreed with the Golden Order's politics. This is the act of people who discovered that the authority the Two Fingers claimed was not real and decided to do something about it. The petrified figures in the Eternal Cities mirror those at Anir Ilim. The Nox tried to recreate Marika's ascension to produce their own Lord of Night through the same gate of divinity. They knew how it worked. And knowing how it worked, knowing that Marika's godhood was a process that could be replicated rather than a divine appointment that could not, they would have understood that the Two Fingers' claim to speak for the greater will was equally replicable, equally hollow. The primeval sorcerers who peered into the primeval current may have seen it too. Looking into the birthplace of all life, into the point where the one great shattered and dispersed, they would have seen not just creation, but the fading of the thing that caused it. The greater will is gone. What remains are its instruments, operating on instructions that stopped arriving an age ago, doing what they believe it would want, filling the silence with their own interpretations and calling it divine guidance. The tree stands above Lanedale, golden and almost transparent. The Two Fingers sit at the round table hold, oriented toward a signal that will take thousands of moons to arrive, if it ever does. Metia waits in her finger birthing grounds, broken and abandoned for a message that has already stopped existing. And you, the Tarnished, walk through all of it, guided by fingers that are pointing in the dark toward a throne that represents an authority nobody has spoken to in longer than the world can remember. By the end, we are the only ones with the power to decide what any of it means. The Kingmaker is us, and what counts as a god is whatever we choose to crown.